Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be able to come today and talk about my private members bill that we tabled this morning. The private members bill will strengthen Canada's sanctions regime to better align with allied countries with the imposition of economic measures and visa bans to immediate family members. It will rename the Special Economic Measures Act, or SEMA, to the Sergei Magnitsky Global Sanctions Act. It will provide a mechanism to remove broadcast licenses from sanctioned entities to ensure that their state television can't broadcast on Canadian airwaves. It will establish a timeline for the forfeiture of frozen assets done under the current sanction regimes, and it will create important reporting mechanisms to ensure parliamentary and public accountability from the Ministers of Foreign Affairs on the use of Canada's sanctions tool. I'm glad to be joined today by Bill Browder, my friend, a global advocate for human rights and fighting corruption. Professor Erwin Kotler is joining us online, along with Brandon Silver, who is here with us in the room from the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Marcus Kolga, who is a longtime advocate for human rights on an international basis and fighting corruption, especially Russian aggression throughout Ukraine and Eastern Europe, from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And my former colleague and friend, Liberal Member of Parliament John McKay. Now, we want to make sure that when we bring forward this new bill, which is called the Sergei Magnitsky International Anti-Corruption and Human Rights Act, we want to make sure that Sergei Magnitsky's name is synonymous with standing up for human rights, good governance, and international peace and security. Now, in 2017, Parliament voted unanimously in favor of the Sergei Magnitsky law that Senator Raynell Andrechuk and I brought forward. And to date, the tools provided in that legislation have been largely collecting dust since 2018. The use of Sergei Magnitsky's name in Canada's sanction regime will deliver a strong political message against Putin's brutal dictatorship and all of his equally corrupt dictator allies and theocracies. So I'm looking forward to having this legislation come up for second reading. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues across the aisle to honor the legacy of Sergei Magnitsky and continue to stand up and make sure Canada is not being used as a safe haven by corrupt foreign officials and gross human rights violators. We have to fight corruption. We have to hold those to account who are responsible for all of the crimes that we're seeing committed against the international norms and the rule of law, and the continued abuses that we're seeing on civil liberties and human rights around the world. I'm going to ask Bill to say a few words. Then Erwin Kotler will also comment on the importance of this legislation. And then John McKay will wrap up our conversation, and then we'll take some questions. Bill.
Great. It was 2017, right around the anniversary of Sergei Magnitsky's murder. He was murdered in 2009, that every single member of both houses of the Canadian Parliament stood up to register their affirmative vote for the passage of the Magnitsky Act. And that was a pivotal moment in the campaign for justice for Sergei Magnitsky. Canada's leadership led to, at this point, more than 35 countries having Magnitsky Acts around the world. And this was a triumphant moment. And shortly after that, the foreign minister at the time, Chrystia Freeland, rolled out the first sanctions list. It included the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky, the people who were involved in the corruption that he uncovered that led to his murder. And it also included people who murdered the journalist, Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and it included a number of people from Venezuela who were involved in gross human rights abuse. 80 people in total. We all cheered, looking for the momentum to be built on this and many other people to be sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act. To this day, not a single other person has been sanctioned under the Canadian Magnitsky Act. All sanctions done against human rights abusers, which I thoroughly support, have been done under the Special Economic Measures Act. Why? There's no answer. But my friend, colleague, and ally, James Bizan, came up with a solution to this problem, which is let's just rename the Special Economic Measures Act the Sergei Magnitsky Act, and then we won't have that problem. This may sound like sort of a petty issue, but it's not. The Magnitsky Act, as I said, 35 countries in the world have the Magnitsky Act, and when they sanction human rights abusers and they want to harmonize those sanctions with other countries, they get confused when they come to Canada. They say, well, are you sanctioning them under your Magnitsky Act, or what's going on? And so first and foremost, I think it's really important that the name is changed. Secondly, we've had 8 years to battle test the Magnitsky Act, and we found deficiencies and flaws and that need to be fixed and tightened. And what James has done with this piece of legislation is gone into those deficiencies. One of the deficiencies is that if a member of Parliament proposes a person to be sanctioned to the government can just let it sit on the government can basically never respond, and this happens often. His legislation will require the government to report back to justify what they have done and haven't done. It also includes provisions to take away the visas of family members of human rights abusers. We often have human rights abusers being sanctioned and their family members being able to come to Canada and enjoy all the great things this country has to offer. I won't go into all the provisions of the law because everyone can read the law themselves, but this is a great way of tightening up the sanctions legislation, not letting the bad guys get away with it, and I'm very happy that James has presented this today, and I'm also very happy that this is not a political. There's no politics involved. There's no Canadian politics. There's no opposition government stuff going on. We have John McKay here as a good friend, and it was also the main guy behind the original Magnitsky Act, because this is all about what's right and wrong, and not about anything else.
Thank you so much, Bill. Dr. Kotler, if you could please bring us your remarks virtually.
It's on mute.
Mute. You got to unmute yourself, Erwin. Okay. Got to find it. Might be on the screen. There's the microphone on the screen. Just
Maybe come back to him afterwards.
okay, John, if you want to just make a few comments while Erwin figures out the mute.
I identify completely with Erwin Kotler. It's for us folks, it's sometimes a challenge to find the mute button. I'm here to, in effect, show a nonpartisan approach to this legislation. I know it's a partisan place upstairs, but there are times where we do come together. And the original Magnitsky legislation was one of those times, and I do want to recognize James and his colleagues on the Conservative side, and Krista Freeland and colleagues on the other side who made sure that Canada had world-leading legislation. Bill has very admirably said that this is time that this legislation be refreshed. All legislation actually should be evergreened. And this is an opportunity to do that. And I'm confident that my Liberal colleagues, or my former colleagues now, will see to it that this legislation receives a passage through the House and the Senate that is constructive, that is useful, that is helpful. I have some confidence as well that the Minister Anand, has a gut sympathy to seeing this legislation refreshed and evergreened. And so I'm looking forward to a relatively short period of time in the House and in committee. And I'm looking forward to the time where this does receive royal assent. And even more, I'm looking forward to the time where this legislation gets enforced with enthusiasm and effectiveness, because the brutal way in which Putin is abusing the people of Ukraine just has to stop, and Canada has to do its role And this is one of the most effective things that we can do. So hopefully, Erwin, have we unmuted by now?
I hope so.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Okay, over to you.
So, may I begin by, James, should I, you want me to?
Yeah, we can.
Go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. May I begin by welcoming Sir Bill Browder, who's the founder and architect of the Global Justice for Sergei Magnitsky movement, because that's what it's become, a movement. And he has been the inspiration for it and was the inspiration for me introducing the first iteration of Magnitsky legislation back in 2012. Fast forward to today, and I'm delighted with James Bazan introducing this timely and necessary set of refinements and remedies to help secure justice for victims and accountability for the major human rights violators. This legislation will protect Canada's sovereignty, security, the rights of its people, while holding the major human rights violators accountable. And we have an increasing access of authoritarianism, and we need these increased remedies and refinements for accountability in the pursuit of justice.
Open it up for questions.
Hi, sorry, Dylan Robertson of the Canadian Press. I know you want to be constructive here, but I'm wondering about the deficiencies in the current regime on sanctions. If I could hear from a few of you about the sort of issues in our current sanctions legislation, more than just one bill, that you're hoping to address here.
So I think, and maybe I'll let Erwin and Brandon and Marcus jump in, because they've been critics of where people have been able to sneak through. The one thing that we're remedying with this bill is to ensure that, whether it's corrupt officials from other countries, human rights abusers, or, enablers like oligarchs from Russia, have been using Canada as a safe haven for their families. We hear all the time of members of the RRGC that their spouses and children are over in Canada working and studying. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. So if you're on the sanctions list by Canada, immediately their family members should also be banned. And so we'll fix that. The other issue that I think that we want to address is that we are already in the process of freezing assets. All you have to do is think about the plane that is sitting at Pearson International Airport from Russia, that big Antonov. And that's been sitting there now for over 2 years. This bill will put a limit of 12 months on those assets being forfeited, and then asking the government within 30 days to start the process of the current regulations of distributing those assets to those that are impacted by whether it's war, whether it's aggression, whether it's corruption, but paying back those victims. Same thing as the victims of Ukrainian Airlines PS-752 that was shot down in Iran. The families in Canada were already awarded by the Ontario Superior Court compensation from the assets that the Iranian regime has here in Canada. And again, those assets are frozen, and the government has had them for years, but yet haven't distributed the value of those assets to the victims' families as ordered by the Ontario Superior Court. But with that, you guys want to add anything? Or Erwin?
Well, I'll have Brandon and Marcus have already
Okay,
spoken.
if you guys want to just quickly address some of the other short.
Well, I'll just quickly mention the fact that transnational repression is also included in this legislative update, and this is very important given the rising tendency of these authoritarian regimes, whether it's Iran, Russia, China, to engage in transnational repression, which is extremely well documented. The Hague Commission also covered this. The fact that it holds those who engage in transnational repression accountable, this is a key point. And we have a number of victims right here. Professor Kotler has required 24-hour security due to threats from the Iranian regime. all parliamentarians in the House of Commons have been placed on Russia's sanctions list. This is a form of transnational repression as well. So this is extraordinarily important that it's included in this legislation, and even just the definition of it, so that parliamentarians and Canadians are aware of this threat to all Canadians and their right to freely express themselves.
Well, one of the primary deficiencies with current sanctions frameworks is the fact that most of the designated persons send their immediate family members to Canada in order to evade those very same sanctions. So the rights, the fundamental freedoms that these human rights perpetrators deny to their compatriots are being enjoyed by their families abroad. And this legislation proposed by MP Bazan helps to fill those gaps to ensure that Canadian sovereignty is not eroded by this corrupt and corrosive foreign capital, and that the banks, the businesses, the beaches that these human rights abusers come to Canada to enjoy are finally and truly closed off to them. And to speak to one of the most important points overall on this bill that MP Bazan and Sir Browder raised, bridging that gap where the Special Economic Measures Act is actually named after Sergei Magnitsky. If not for the 2017 amendments, human rights and corruption would not be able to be a sanctionable offense under SEMA. So for the sake of comity, as they mentioned, for the sake of collaboration with our partners, it just makes sense to name those human rights sanctions provisions after Sergei Magnitsky. They would not exist without that legislation, and they make up close to 90% of human rights sanctions. So those changes, over about 570 sanctions have been implemented under those provisions since 2017, which again make up 90% of Canada's human rights sanctions framework. It warrants this very timely and necessary change.
Good. Anyone else?
As a follow-up, just wondering if, especially the two MPs on stage, if you wanted to comment on the internal review that Global Affairs did of its own sanctions regime, seemed to confirm a lot of what the House and the Senate said. If anything else, it said it's worse than what the committees had found, that there's serious gaps in being able to track our sanctions, that it's a bit of a dog's breakfast when it comes to resourcing, identifying people. The report actually asks for a wholesale legislative review, that we've got these three acts that need to be combined. I'm just wondering what you make of that and if that relates to your
So the
bill.
March 2025 report, I've been flipping through it, and it does lay out a number of disturbing facts. And I think what we're trying to do to some degree in my bill C-219 is that provide more support by having the RCMP and FedTrack report right back to the Minister of Foreign Affairs on what they're doing to enact, administer, and enforce regulations, which are the sanctions that are being levied against individuals and entities. So that provides, I think, a mechanism. But as to the resourcing for the Sanctions Bureau under Global Affairs Canada, there's no question that they are going to need more bodies. Not that we're trying to increase the sanctions list, but if we're going to be a reliable ally in bringing forward sanctions to prohibit corrupt foreign officials, those major gross human right violators from around the world, from using Canada as a safe haven, then we have to have the tools at the administrative level and at the enforcement level to make it happen. So I know that there's been some concern that the RCMP doesn't have enough personnel as well on their federal responsibilities at the national level. So those will have to be looked at and adjustments made so that Canada is never a safe haven for those that are trying to hide their illicit wealth and their families while they're committing, human rights violations against their own citizens, as well as creating destabilizing impacts in regions like the war in Ukraine, the ongoing aggression against Taiwan, and things along that nature. Anybody want to add to that? With that, anyone else?
If we have time for questions on Zoom? Yeah?
Oh, there's Zoom, okay.
First question, Lim and Zhu, please go ahead.
I'm from Newtown Dynasty TV. Could you elaborate how does the new bill apply to foreign officials and foreign agents who participate in transnational repression against Canadians. You know, for example, the Chinese Communist Party's transnational repression against desperate groups like the human rights activists, Hong Kong democracy activists, the Falun Gong community, and Uyghurs and others. So, you know, like there's mention that it can apply in the case of transnational repression, but how does that work?
So now, under the legislation that we have, they haven't been a definition of what would constitute transnational repression. And we would just, with this new definition that we're adding to it, those individuals who are here intimidating Canadians and those that are living here as permanent residents, as students, as we've seen in the past, and trying to carry out the policy objectives of the regime in Beijing, the regime in Tehran. We know that those individuals that are here are known to both the RCMP, CSIS, and others. That now we can take action to sanction them, to immediately ban them from being in Canada, along with their families, with the changes that are being made through this legislation. So Bill C-29 will remedy the problem that we've had, and we'll be able to more effectively target those individuals who are also providing political interference, as we witnessed. A number of us are on different, foreign sanctions lists already, and have been targeted both from a cybersecurity standpoint or physically, as Erwin Kotler has experienced as well, with the threats that have been leveled against him. Erwin, do you want to add anything to that about political interference and transnational aggression?
Only that I think this is such an important component of this legislation, because that transnational repression and assassination really is a direct threat to our sovereignty, to our security, and to the rights of Canadians.
Good. Thank you very much.
This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Appreciate it.